Welcome back to the Valley to Peak Nutrition Podcast. It is Lindsay and Kyle this week, back with a Q&A after a pretty long hiatus with us both. We've been busy, but I won't bore you with that. So we've got 4 good questions this week that we will cover, and then a handful of other really great stuff coming this year still, and another good Q&A already in the works about things you guys wanted to know as far as um, how do we get our kids involved in this stuff too? So a lot of good stuff to coming, but here are the 4 from this week.
Is there a way to increase our metabolism in a meaningful way?
So when you looked at these and before we got started, you asked a question to me about this question. What was it?
I said, "What does this person mean?" And I don't have names or anything. I just said, "What does this person mean by meaningful?" I assume when I read that, that means permanent way or successful way, not just something quick, like actually successfully increase metabolism, probably healthily.
Yeah, so what they're basically saying, and this is kind of the when anyone asks this, when anyone asks and if anything works as it relates to nutrition, they're always wanting to know, is it in a meaningful way? And what they often mean by that is, am I going to notice a difference? Is it tangible? Does it matter? Does the time or the product or the effort or the intentionality or whatever, is that going to be, am I going to see the difference so much so that it's worth me investing whatever it is, time, energy, effort, etc. So, to this person's question, is there a way to increase our metabolism in a meaningful way? Yes. However, the meaningful way is the long way, it is the hard way, and it is the very, very slow way. I will say this because there are so many things out there that promise an increase in metabolism. Virtually none of them actually work except this one. This one is you have to increase your lean body mass. You have to increase your muscle. The reason that that works is because we know that, if you take a person and let's say that you break them 15 years apart, you do a 30-year study on them, you do the first 15 years, then the second 15 years, and let's just assume that everything else stays the same across those 30 years except for their lean mass. Even their weight's the same, which is really important as a part of this conversation. The demand, the energy demands of muscle is very, very high to keep. In other words, you have to fuel that. It requires a lot of calories to keep that muscle. So if you have that individual over 30 years who weighs the exact same weight, and one 15-year segment they have a lot of muscle, and one 15-year segment they do not have any muscle, the 15-year segment in which they don't carry any muscle, their metabolism's much slower because there's no demand there. So the demand for keeping your body fat is fairly low. The demand for keeping your lean muscle mass is fairly high. So the only real way to increase your metabolism in a substantial way is by increasing your lean body mass or increasing your muscle. Now, one other thing that I will say, like as a part of this, and we'll call this like middle of the row, intermediate yes, no type of an answer. Protein, if you think about the 3 macronutrients, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, protein does require the most energy to break down. I'm going to come back to that. Do not turn the podcast off and just start pounding protein. So when you think about a pie graph, and when we first onboard someone, we often show this pie graph of, what makes up your own personal calorie demands. And there's a little chunk, a little slice out of that pie. It's 10% of your total calorie demands that is dedicated towards your body processing the food that you eat. It's called the thermic effect of food, meaning it's literally how your body uses heat to expend what you've just eaten, and that costs you some calories. It's very, very low. Now, again, going back to my protein comment, Of the 3 macros, as a part of that TEF, thermic effective food, protein demands the most calories to process. It's the most challenging thing for the body to process, and so you get people eating really, really high protein diets, and they'll suggest that that's going to increase metabolism. So, in theory, yes, but is that meaningful? No, not if you're doing the other things, right? So, it's really, really important that you will hear all the time on social media X, Y, and Z increases metabolism or it causes body fat. There may be some truth in it, but what you are always trying to distill down and pull out is it meaningful? Am I going to notice? And if the answer to that is no, frankly, I wouldn't waste your time.
You said out of the macronutrients, protein is the one that the body has to work the hardest, takes the longest to process. Processed, that doesn't mean digest. Does that mean pull nutrients out of it, turn it into energy, which I think is what metabolism means? Like, when you're saying process it, what do you mean?
It does mean digest it. So as it breaks it down, so you have to think that there's a whole process from the point that you eat what is a delicious cheeseburger. At some point, that turns from a delicious cheeseburger into nutrients that are allowing you to stay alive. There's an entire process, and that entire process is called metabolism. So, of that cheeseburger, you have the burger, protein, you have the bun, carbohydrate, and you have, let's just say that you've got some mayo as well as some fat in the burger. Carbohydrates and fats are gonna be the easiest thing in that scenario to metabolize. Protein's gonna take the longest, and so it's gonna have it's gonna help you. I'm not even gonna say it's gonna help you. It's gonna have a higher thermic effect, but again, that alone is not significant enough to increase your metabolism to a noticeable difference. Increasing your muscle will. That is the only known way that we have to meaningfully, that is the key word, to meaningfully increase your metabolism is by increasing your muscle mass, which is one of the many, 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 many reasons I am and science is a huge fan of lifting weights, resistance training, regardless of what it makes you look like. I mean, we've almost found nothing bad. Almost everything from it, gives a benefit. So, yeah, don't waste your money and your time on anything unless it's a gym membership or a set of weights for your garage.
Why does increasing muscle mass, I know the protein and muscle mass go together, I get that, but why does increasing muscle mass increase metabolism?
Yeah, because muscle is it demands a lot more, right? So the cost to keeping muscle around, like if the currency is calories, the cost to keeping muscle around is much, much higher than body fat, right? So if you want to keep it, it's going to cost you something, and that currency is calories. So if you take a person and that person weighs 200 pounds and 150 of that is muscle versus 100 of that being muscle, that person that has 150 pounds of that 200 pounds of muscle, 75% muscle mass, um, is going to have a much higher metabolism than that person who is only has 100 pounds of muscle mass. And this is one of the main reasons, not main, this is one of the reasons, one of the significant reasons why it's so much easier for men to lose weight, maintain lower weights, etc., than women. They carry much more muscle mass than a woman does. So, yeah, it's not like a thing where I hear all the time, my husband stops eating half the bowl of mac and cheese and instead eats a quarter of the bowl and he loses 25 pounds. I've been on X, Y, and Z diet for years and I can't lose anything, says the spouse, the wife. And there's a lot of variables in there. And that's why calculators online don't work. And we could go down the line of other stuff. But all right, we settle that one. Number two.
The next question says, "What is energy expenditure exactly?"
So this is actually I didn't plan this, but this goes really well with the previous question. Your energy expenditure is exactly what it sounds like. How much energy What is the cost of the things you do during the day? How many calories are you burning through the course of the day? Now, energy expenditure exactly is different than that. It makes sense to most of us where your time in a gym would be a part of your energy expenditure. You are using calories to do whatever it is that you are doing in the gym or on a training hike or in the mountain, whatever. You're using something, and that cost is calories. Energy expenditure, though, also includes what you are doing the rest of the day. Sitting in an office chair versus working a construction site. Those are two massive different energy expenditures. Even if even if all the other variables were the same and controlled. The other piece of the energy expenditure equation is exactly what we just talked about. How much muscle mass compared to or relative to body fat does a person carry? Those two people, even if all other things are the same, are going to have different energy expenditures. Their metabolism is going to be different. How many calories they've got to eat are going to be different. One thing that I think is really interesting, and this question is so good about pointing it out, this is one thing we see massive differences in within our program among people. You'll have people really adherent to a nutrition protocol. You'll have people who are active, and then those same people will spend the rest of their waking and sleeping hours doing nothing at all and really struggle to, make any sort of progress. When we studied this, and we studied this among big groups and specifically among the biggest loser contestants, there's been a lot of research done on them over the years now that it's been so long since the show was first out. We find that a person's energy expenditure varies significantly as a part of their total calorie needs and how active they are or are not outside of the gym plays a massive role in their ability to either reach a goal or maintain that goal after it's reached. And so one of the questions that we have in our check-in is how many steps did you take? And that seems so stupid and seems so antiquated, but steps can be a measurable for this. If you only take 3,000 steps in a day and you increase by double, you move from 3 to 6, that's a fairly significant increase, and believe it or not, that is going to account in your energy expenditure. So, it does play a huge role, and there are multiple different layers as to what accounts for it when you're looking at things. All right, third.
This person said, "Firstly, I appreciate your podcast and find the information to be extremely helpful in my fitness journey. The question I have is this: I wake up at 4 and arrive at the gym by 5. I typically consume 2 cups of coffee while responding to emails. I do not eat beforehand." I assume that means before the gym. What would be a suitable pre workout breakfast option for me when I don't have time to prepare a meal like bacon and eggs?
Yeah, that's great. So, this is one of those questions is gonna have a big overarching "it depends" over it. So part of what it depends on is how your nutrition is throughout the entire week. In theory, if you have a nutrition plan that is detailed down, that you follow, and it is to your needs, like you've went into that deep dive, you're getting what you need on a day-to-day basis. If that training session is not more than an hour, hour and a half, you may not need anything. And the reason for that is because the nutrient stores that you've already spent the day before filling back up because you knew what you needed, it's going to break down and deliver fuel to you during the workout. You don't necessarily need to eat prior to this workout to get something out of it. If you don't do that, if you don't know your personal nutrition needs, if you don't necessarily follow anything, if it's all over the place, you have no real plan, whether it's loose or formal, you may not have gotten enough the day before, and you may need something before that. So that's number one. We'll come back to that in a second. Number two would be if that training session extends longer than an hour, hour and a half, you may need something during it. And that's even if you know you've got a really detailed and good nutrition plan. If it's all over the board and you're trying to eat something ahead of time, What you eat is largely going to be dependent upon how long of a time gap you have between eating and your exercise. If it's a long gap, call it 2 hours, you can eat complex carbohydrates and, you can eat more complex carbohydrates in whole meals because there's plenty of time there for that to break down and deliver nutrition to you.
Why don't you tell the crowd what is a complex carbohydrate? Just asking for a friend.
I'm gonna get back to that. If you have very little time, like I wake up, get in the car, and go get after it, then you're going to want to eat something that's much easier to digest, like a simple carbohydrate. Here's the difference between complex and simple that we always teach and preach. If you think about a very long chain that is comprised of multiple chain links, a complex carbohydrate is basically looks like that. After you eat it and you process it, it is like a chain in your muscle. As you need a little energy, it breaks off one link and gives it to you while it leaves the rest of the chain. You need more energy, it breaks off a link and it gives it to you and it leaves the rest of the chain. This process happens over 2, 3, 4 hours until you eat again. And this goes back to where I said if you know what your nutrition needs are, that chain is already in place when you wake up in the morning because you spent the day before filling it up. The simple carbohydrate is essentially like you're getting one chain link, right? I mean, you eat it and it is instant delivery. So there is case use for both of them. And, we've kind of become synonymous with gummy bears, jokingly over the years. It's not like I'm an advocate of the sugar industry by any means. I think we preached this multiple times over the podcast that that's not true. However, if I am leaving my house at 4 and plan to need to start working out at 4:15, I by that my oats and my healthy whole grain blah 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 is not even done processing and giving me fuel until I'm done. I'm done and back at home showering before it ever even hits me. However, if I drink a glass of juice, simple carbohydrate. If I have a handful of grapes, simple carbohydrate. If I have gummy bears, simple carbohydrate. If I have a piece of fruit, more of a basic carbohydrate. It's going to get delivered to me much, much, much faster and give me fuel during that workout rather than waiting until later. So the two parts to his question are it's going to depend on all these different variables. Second to that, I wouldn't eat bacon and eggs. I would eat something with carbohydrate because that's going to be the main fuel source. Now, if it's a really low intensity workout, then you may be able to get by with something higher in fat and higher in protein like bacon and eggs, but you're going to probably want some fuel from some carbs.
What are examples of some complex ones?
Yeah, that's a great question. So complex carbs are going to be anything that are more starchy. Oats, breads, bagels, sweet potatoes, regular potatoes, and there's even differences between um, refined complex carbohydrates and whole grain carbohydrates. So, like don't look at a piece of white bread and say, oh, that's a simple carb. No, it still is a starch, fairly complex, at least in chemical structure, although refined because the whole grains have been moved out. So it'll be a little bit different in processing, but same premise. Fourth.
Next question says, is 215 going to be a challenge to hit without increasing activity?
Yeah, this was a good question. So this was actually from a client that we had in the program. He had a specific goal in mind. He had already he'd already done tremendous work with no exercise whatsoever. And as we've talked about, it gets harder the closer you get to the goal to get to that goal. It's easy at first, and then almost in a cruel kind of a way, the body starts to rebel and makes it very challenging to get to the goal the closer you get to it. And so this question was, am I gonna have to introduce activity to really get there? I had a guy yesterday on a call ask me the same thing who was interested in the program. And he's like, well, I'm thinking about just starting to do a couple workouts per day of really high intensity. And I was like, man, don't leverage that because the likelihood that you're going to be able to keep doing that for the rest of your life is probably pretty low if you're not already into that and doing it. So, yeah, I mean, there's a bazillion reasons why being active is good. leveraging it for the sake of an higher expenditure isn't always one of them unless you're just passionate about it. Like if you're passionate about mountain biking, go mountain bike because of the passion, not because of what it necessarily does for you from a caloric standpoint. So my answer to him was, it depends. So we talk about things, we use a metaphor of a lever of nutrition and a lever of activity, and how hard you pull on either of those levers is largely going to determine what the outcome is that you want. But I said there's basically four things that you can keep in mind. If you've got a goal and it starts to get really challenging to reach that goal, and you're looking at what to do, you can either reduce the intake, the lever of calories, the lever of nutrition. You can increase the activity. You can do a combination of the two, or you can rein it in and call it good and move towards maintenance, right? At some point, I do think it is worth going to maintenance rather than striving and striving and striving to get to the goal, because we have seen a lot of people feel very proud of what they've done. All of a sudden, it just turns into this catastrophe because they can't get another 2 pounds off. And in all reality, it would have been better just to say, look, you've done a remarkable job. Let's just go to maintenance. So you've got those four things that you can kind of leverage if you start to find that you get stuck. This goes back to comments on the expenditure end of things and feeling like step counts don't really matter. They did a study a few years ago where they monitored people over a year, and once per hour during their workday, they had them get up every 1 minute, or I'm sorry, they had them walk for 1 minute per hour, 2 minutes every hour, or 5 minutes every hour, and they looked at their expenditure over the course of the year. If a person stands up in their workday after walking 5 minutes every hour, so like let's say at the top of every hour you stand up and you go for a 5-minute walk, that person had expended an additional 34,000 calories over 12 months just by standing up one time per hour and walking for 5 minutes. That's a significant difference than just sitting in the chair. So whether you lean on reducing intake, increasing activity, combination of the two, or just going to maintenance is largely going to be dependent on, frankly, your sanity. What can you do that's not going to drive you crazy? And if it is going to drive you crazy, then it's probably time that you go to maintenance, because your ability to maintain will largely be determined by what you did to get there. Because even though it sounds like, oh, okay, I'm done once you get to maintenance, you're not. Things get a little more, let's call them lenient, but you're not necessarily done either. So you want to find really sustainable ways to reach the goal that you have, even once you get to maintenance. So that is it. That is our four for this week. Like I said, we've got a lot of other exciting podcasts coming up down the line. I'm apprehensive to give them away, but I do want to share this with you guys. On July the 16th at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, we are doing a live backcountry Q&A completely for free. The only thing you need to do is you need to sign up with your email at the link in the show notes. And that is so I can send you an invite to the room, as well as get you some free resources afterwards. And so it's a Q&A dedicated to anything that you guys want to know on July 16th at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. It is completely free. We'll give you some freebies at the end of it that you can use as you start to plan trips this year or into next year. And of course, if you got any questions, you can always send those to me as well, but it's all pretty straightforward and outlined in there. So thank you guys for sending the questions. Thank you for joining us. If you have other questions you want us to cover, send them to us, info@v2pnutrition.com. We'll be back again in a couple of weeks with more new episodes. Have a great week, everyone.